us.
We'll call the November regular meeting of the Cross Lake City Council to order at 6 p.m. on Monday, November 14th. And we'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're gonna change that, you know.
That was a piece of private conversation that said that among all the things that are going to be changed, they're going to change that. Anyway, we'll move on. Need approval for the additions to the agenda. Or additional bills.
No, Mr. Mayor, if I can, I think what we're gonna do first is do the wastewater treatment plant review, and then we'll get into the regular meeting starting at 7 o'clock, if you don't mind.
That's fine with me. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
We have with us tonight representatives of Bolton and Mink that have, at our request, performed a wastewater treatment plant review, and they're here to report on it this evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mike Reardon, Bolton and Mink. I've got with me John Groutman and Paul Saffert. They're senior environmental engineers in our company, really overseeing wastewater and water. So they're the two that have been working on this with me and Ted, but they're really the workhorses, and in particular John
Welcome.
help do the majority of this. So what I want to do is that brief introduction, talk only for a minute or two, and then turn it over to John. So what we hope to accomplish is talk about general findings, the WSN proposal, plant capacity and utilization, because we think that's a topic that really needs to be discussed here to know where you can possibly go in the future. And then our recommendations or approach to the plant, the problems out there, and the future. And our approach is different than WSN's. After the presentation by John, it'll take probably 30 minutes, give or take. And I would say that if you want to ask questions as you go along, do that. Probably the more questions you ask, the longer it'll take, but that's fine, because it's maybe better to address them then. Certainly at the end, we want to give a chance to talk about any concerns you might have, questions specifically from you. And Ted, he's going to be operating whatever you ultimately decide to do, and certainly his input needs to be heard. And then I think, so what? Where do you go from here? What are some next steps? So that when you walk out of here, either you know you have to stop and deliberate a little bit, or you can move along, you know where you want to go. So that's how we see this here working. And with that, then I'll turn it over to John, and he can do the presentation.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This over maybe. Better access for the buttons. So I do not have a laser pointer. Just quick outline of the review. One of the things we looked at was reviewing the overall capacity of the facility. It's kind of the first step, rather than just looking at some of the technical parts that are being proposed. We wanted to look at the overall capacity of the plant. Again, as Mike mentioned, also the plant utilization. As a tourist community, typically you have some pretty wide swings of flows, and really looking at how the plant utilization goes. We'll then look at some recommended improvements, and I think as Mike also mentioned, some long-range plans, and also possibly some funding going forward. Quick background on the facility: constructed in 2004. Recently, WSN did what was called a wastewater treatment facility capital improvement study. Again, it's just another wastewater report. That was dated in April, and Council's had that for a few months now to look at. Quick update also, the permit renewal was required to be submitted within the last month. I do believe Ted has that completed. That's done 6 months in advance of the permit. The project you're looking to go forward, whatever scope you would look at this point, really has no significant impact on that permit renewal. You're not looking to change permit limits, you're not looking to increase flow, so essentially you're just a minor modification to that permit whenever you would proceed with actually making improvements. You really don't want to write that in your permit because that will lock you into a compliance schedule with the MPCA, which is something most communities would rather avoid.
Just a second, we got a question here.
I'm not sure if you're getting picked up on the sound because you're
Okay.
so far from the microphone and
Thank you.
people will be watching this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
So looking quickly, again at the existing facility, you're rated at an average flow of 150,000 gallons per day, which is what's called an average wet weather flow. And I apologize, there's going to be some acronyms, but that's an average flow design rating. It's what the PCA puts in your permit, and that's what typically is looked at as far as plant capacity. The other factor we have to look at with the plant, though, is what's the peak capacity that the plant can handle. That's the peak hourly wet weather flow. That's what the lift station pumps to it. All the pipes in your plant and all the processes need to handle the peak flows. If they can't handle it, you're going to have a bypass. And obviously that's going to be a problem. Looking at the figure that's on this sheet, typical flow daily variations. The red line is what would be an average flow. If we took the 24 hours of flow as an average, the blue line indicates kind of the daily variations from the evening flow to the morning peaks to an evening peak. A town such as Cross Lake typically is going to have a peak of at least 4 times their average to what their morning peak is. The larger the town, the smaller the peak. The smaller town, the bigger the peak, and particularly when you're a bedroom community and a tourist community, those peaks are even larger than what the average would be. So with that, based both on the lift station capacity and based on your average wet weather design, we believe the plant peak capacity should be 500 gallons a minute. That's what your current lift station pumps can do, and we believe everything downstream should be able to handle that. You have a 12-inch gravity line that feeds your lift station. At the moment, your lift station is out pumping what your plant can handle, and it does have the potential to cause bypasses or overflow structures downstream within the wastewater plant. That's that's probably the more significant problems we see. I'll kind of hit on through this whole presentation is you do have some hydraulic bottlenecks in the plant. So right now the city is in process of replacing lift station pumps with some that are better handling solids. They will be a little bit lower capacity. While that's going to work well in the short term, we do believe that's a little bit of a short-sighted solution is to downsize pumps. You've built the 150,000 gallon average day plant. It should be able to treat that. That's what you paid for, and that's what long-term you should be able to do. Looking at the pretreatment, ironically there, the screen is actually a little bit too large. The vendor that's provided it has big, bigger, and biggest, and you're a smaller community, and they provided the smallest they had, which was still a little bit too large for the city. That can be worked around, but it does cause some problems for the staff. Grit separation is adequate size. Probably the biggest bottleneck in the plant is coming out of the pretreatment facility. You have a 6-inch gravity line that feeds the next process. Feeding that line, there's a 6-inch force main, there's a 4-inch force main, and another 4-inch force main. All that's trying to funnel into one 6-inch gravity line. And that probably jumps out. You can kind of see the numbers aren't going to work. If you went and bought a 150 horsepower motor and you had a 50 horsepower fuel injection system in it, you can see you're not getting the value for your plant. So that's probably what we see as one of the bigger bottlenecks in the plant. The oxidation ditches, which are really the workhorse of the plant as far as treating the waste part of the flow, those are in great shape. They're meeting both your peak and your average flows. Really see no significant issues with that part of the process. Secondary clarifiers, those are essentially the settling tanks. Those, again, we believe are significantly undersized based on what your lift station can do and what some other plant internal recycle flows are. Together, those are rated for around 320 gallons a minute, and this causes operations some significant headaches, and Ted can maybe touch on that, but they are undersized at the moment, and they do cause some potential permit violations. The tertiary filters, which are the sand filters at the end of the plant, those are retrofitted by staff already subsequent to 2004. The original style was fairly inefficient, was very operator intensive, poor performance. So Ted did work to get those converted to a more traditional system that has been working much better. Those filters, 7.5-foot diameter each. We anticipate you really are maxing out about 270 gallons a minute, which I believe is what staff typically sees as a pretty effective number. Again, that's about half of what the lift station capacity is. So again, that's a fairly significant bottleneck. The last step of the process is the disinfection. That's the ultraviolet disinfection before it goes to the receiving water, and that is adequately sized for both average and peak flows. There's been no issues with that piece of the process. So if we look at an overview, the goal is for all the processes to handle the peak flow of 500 gallons a minute. And you can see right now there's 3 of the processes which are significant bottlenecks and are really preventing the city from properly utilizing the wastewater plant. And also causing some potential bypasses and violations for staff. If we look at the current utilization, the average flows in the summer months are topping out at 55,000 gallons per day. Your one-day peaks are topping out around 100,000 gallons per day. So if we look at the average flow basis, you're around 35% of your design rated capacity. You have a lot of utilization available, a lot of revenue source available. But if we look at peak flow, right now you are essentially at 100% capacity and really don't have any room to grow to utilize that capacity. Right now your permitted capacity is paper capacity and really doesn't exist at the plant for utilization as it currently is configured.
Are you saying that that comment is based on the 3 processes that are short in
Yes.
capacity? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. That is
Okay.
based on the
Yep.
piping limitation, the oxidation ditch, at the clarifiers and at the filters.
I thought this was a packaged plant. When they put...
Correct.
Huh?
Yes, it is, to some degree. I would consider it similar to package plant.
How do we end up with intermediate piping within the plant that, I mean, that one is unbelievably short? Where you feed the multiple pressure lines in and outflow it with a gravity?
I don't know for sure. Typically, particularly working with a Lakeside vendor, which is, most of this equipment is a Lakeside brand.
Yep.
They provide the main components. They typically don't do the auxiliary pieces, the interconnection piping.
Okay.
So that becomes
Fair enough.
probably an engineering
Understand that.
portion of
Thank
that.
you.
So one of the things we're looking at is to utilize that capacity. We'd look to put a flow equalization tank in. I'll discuss that a little bit more. Your issues are limited by the clarifier and filter capacity. The plant was designed to actually double the capacity and do a mirror image. That would help to do those. Right now, with the building constructed you have around the filters and the clarifier, it's going to be fairly expensive, fairly difficult to do that. We would recommend possibly instead putting a flow equalization tank between the pretreatment and the oxidation ditch. That would, essentially where that 6-inch bottleneck pipe is, we'd replace that with a larger pipe and with also a larger tank. And that tank is going to be a buffer tank. When you have peak flows, which if you remember that figure, those peak flows are going to be stored there for 12 hours, 24 hours, however long it takes, until you get the evening flows, where your flows are almost zero most nights. And we'd have some pumps that would just slowly pump it back at a steady rate all day long. The plant's going to run more efficiently. It's going to take the peaks off your filters and clarifiers. They will run far more efficiently, and the whole system will start to run smoother.
That buffer tank would be on the inlet side of the
We put it
plant?
right after the pretreatment facility, on the inlet side, yes.
All right.
Just on the back side of the pretreatment facility, between that and the oxidation ditch building. It would eliminate the shock loads. Again, that location also eliminates the 6-inch bottleneck piping. We would have to replace that, but essentially that tank would be constructed in the path of that 6-inch piping, and it would be incidental to the construction of that process. Other priority items, and this kind of reflects some of the items that were in the WSN report. A SCADA system, which is essentially that's the computer operating system. It's the desktop operating system or just the panel view operating system. The plant has some of that capability right now. It is not all integrated into one common system, and we would recommend, as WSN did, to integrate that. The plant is a robust plant as far as treatment goes, but is a very, very basic plant as far as operation and controls go. It's one of the more manually operated plants that I've run across as far as lack of ability to automate, weekend time, et cetera. The RAS, WS, essentially that's the biosolids, valving and wasting. That's your sludge, your biosolids, whichever you want to call that. Right now, that has to be manually wasted by turning valves and turning pumps. That is the only, I have 20-plus years of experience, that is the first plant I've seen with an activated sludge system that does not have provisions to automate that portion of the plant. That should be done multiple times per day, has to be done every day on the weekends, and it becomes inefficient to have to do that on weekends. Because they do it in one shot rather than small intermittent shots, it becomes inefficient that you end up pumping some clean water to your biosolids tanks, your sludge tanks. That clean water is either additional cost to truck it later, or it has to be recycled through the plant, which at your current bottlenecks, it's very difficult to recycle water through the plant because that's a shock load coming back through. And right now, without a flow equalization tank, that's a challenge for staff to do that. So kind of, they start to chase their tail with a couple of these items. The filter backwash, right with that modification, it's not an automated system, it's manual. It's at least one time per day that staff is washing that filter. That's an hour to up to 3 hours, depending what the conditions are, that they have to be there babysitting that and trying to run that. They do need a backwash holding tank, which could be plant effluent. We could be looking at about a 10,000 gallon tank, just hold plant effluent, which would be recycled. Another concept that Ted has mentioned, I think was also mentioned in the report, was trying to do a larger storage tank and a well, so you can use well water with that, making that a multi-purpose storage tank. That could easily work. We have some concerns siting that on the wastewater plant site itself is going to be problematic with some setbacks as far as wastewater to wells and other water. But that process could be viable, but there are some challenges if you want to put it on the wastewater site. But very simply, we could recycle plant effluent for the backwash. But without a backwash holding tank, staff has to sit there and wait for the tank to refill before they wash the second filter. There's 2 filters, and they wash one. They have to wait for the second one to fill and wash the second one.
To the well you were just referring to, is this the well that we talked about a few weeks ago at City Council that would help the fire department and their needs?
Yes, I anticipate that is the
That's
well that was talked about.
also the well, because that brought in, because of its size, also DNR regulations of some type?
That would have multiple regulations between the DNR for appropriations, Department of Health, if you were to ever use it as far as any kind of potable water system, and obviously the PCA for dealing with the wastewater side. So it does become a little bit more of a regulatory challenge. But the bigger problem is the setbacks if we want to put it on the wastewater site. Really limits future use of the wastewater site and also use of that well. If there is adjacent land next to the wastewater plant, it could be a very viable option. Would be my first thoughts at that. So that's what we're looking at as far as the filters. Looking ferric chloride flow pacing. Ferric chloride is a chemical you're using to take out phosphorus. Obviously, phosphorus is a high topic item. You have a very stringent limit for phosphorus. It's the algae causing element that everybody's trying to remove to protect the lake water quality. So right now the city is doing a very good job of treating phosphorus, but it's very expensive because without you've seen the flow pace, the graph. You don't have an ability for the pumps to automatically ramp up and down with the flows. So typically, to be safe, you set them at the higher end of those flows, and for 12 to 18 hours at night during low flows, the pumps are just essentially wasting chemical, overdosing. That causes problems throughout the system in that it's an acidic product. It actually drops pH to the point that you're spending additional time and money adding another chemical that keeps the pH up. So it's kind of, again, chasing the tail is where we're at right there. So would strongly recommend the ferric chloride flow pacing. And one of the links to all of these that we've talked about is these all, are basic automation. These are bringing this plant just to a standard level of operation. This would not be a Cadillac plant. You're on the very, very low end of automation. This would bring it up to the moderate intermediate range. This is not jumping up to a Cadillac or a fancy type of plant, but all of these do interact with the SCADA system that we first talked about. Last is generator sizing. Right now, the generator runs essentially half the plant. It runs one ditch. The other ditch is not operated by the generator. During the winter, typically staff is only running one of the two ditches, and most of the time you'd rather rotate which one is offline to maintain even wear. If you do that, you have a 50-50 shot that winter you have no backup power for that particular ditch. I don't know for sure why it was done that way. Apparently it was a money-saving effort. The marginal cost of making a generator a little larger to pick up a couple more 7.5 power motors is relatively small. So I don't know, going back in history, I can't tell you why it was done that way. But right now the plant doesn't have full operation when the generator would kick in. You have the potential that you'd be running the plant without any treatment. If that goes any extended period of time, the biology begins to go anaerobic, and that's when you start to generate odors and violations. The city's been fortunate to date not to have that issue, but really walking a fine edge with that. So we would recommend replacing the generator with one large enough to run the full facility. And I would also recommend oversizing slightly. If we look at the flow equalization, we're adding a couple of critical pumps would have to be operated, and possibly anything else we'd see for short-term improvements to have some capacity to run.
That generator does not power the lift stations, however, that are remote from the plant.
It powers only the main lift station at the plant.
At the plant.
It does not power the others.
I have another question. We're talking about holding tanks within the process to mitigate the peaks and valleys of the flow.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought we could do that in front of the plant. So we'd pump into a reservoir, if you will, and then level the flow into the plant. However, apparently this summer, Ted can speak to this, we experienced a peak flow that started in, when was it, Ted? 4th of July?
Before the 4th, about midway through June.
Yep, and extended almost all the way through the whole summer.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that just kind of blew that whole idea away. And I don't see that stopping. There's something going on here in Cross Lake that has to do with growth that I don't think we've all quite got our heads around. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Project implementation, realistically, those capacity issues we would recommend be addressed within the next 1 to 2 years. With the pretreatment facility with that undersized pipe, staff actually has to plug one of the two pipes when they take a ditch offline, so it does not overflow into the ditch. They're running on the edge of overflowing the structure multiple times per year. Any overflow is small, no matter how small, is considered a bypass. Staff would be required at that point to call the duty officer to try to get samples, go through all the paperwork, getting the notices of violation. No matter how small and how well contained it is, it creates a mountain of paperwork that I think the city and city staff would rather avoid. And right now you're on that edge all the time. And as Ted noticed, and I think Mayor just referred to, last year some of the peak flows were increasing, and given the constraints within the plant, the ability to handle those peak flows continually is reduced.
Yep.
We also would recommend doing this as one larger project versus 2 to 3. I do believe there's a significant economy of scale doing this as one large project versus multiple projects. It's a little bit tricky to separate some of these, as many of these projects are interrelated, and trying to break them into multiple projects, we start to double up on work. You're paying mobilization to a contractor multiple times, and this is even at the number we're looking at, this is a relatively small project, and to maximize contractor interest, trying to keep as much in that as possible will be the best for the budget is our recommendation. And looking at the overall cost estimate, without knowing the full scope and full phasing. Our budgetary range right now we'll be looking at is still in that $1 million range, up to maybe $1.2 million. Right now, we're looking at this somewhat as concepts versus formal design. I would recommend, what the council would want is to go back, look a little more detail at how things would lay out, and look at try to develop a firmer cost estimate at that point in time. Again, looking at long-range planning and funding, the wastewater plant has significant capacity if some improvements are made to utilize that. That's a great resource for the city. You have essentially triple the number of connections that are currently there that you could treat if the bottlenecks were fixed. That's some revenue sources for operations. It's also protecting the lakes in the area. The high median income of the city does limit some of your funding sources. The state does have a low-interest loan revolving program, which the city may be eligible for, depending what the project is. The project we're discussing, unfortunately, is going to score very low in that program because your plant's less than 20 years old. We're not treating for lower limits, and just there's a worksheet of scoring points, and most of the conditions we're looking at do not score well at this point in time. Unsewered areas obviously score quite high, and they typically be a much higher chance of getting scored if you're doing a sewer system improvement. I'd also recommend looking at a rate evaluation or looking at financing and how the city is looking to finance the proposed improvements, whatever the final scope would be. So just a summary before I turn it back to Mike is our approach would be to try to fix the hydraulic limitations of the plant first and foremost, and then also look at improving the other plant operational items such as the SCADA, the biosolids pumping, and the filter operation, et cetera. That's really what we think. Right now, the WSN report, the feel we have is there were more patches and bandages on that to try and fix the root of the problem, which is that there are some piping limitations and some sizing limitations in the plant. And until those are fixed, everything is essentially just kind of trying to treat the symptoms versus actually cure the problem. And again, just to reiterate, the city has a great resource available in its hands with the wastewater treatment plant and the capacity that's still remaining with that. And there's a number of communities out there that would be quite envious of that growth capacity. And I do have attached to this more detailed review of some of the itemized improvements that WSN had talked about. If council has questions on those, we can bound through them, but otherwise, in the sake of time and not getting too technical, we wanted to kind of hit the overview. And I'll turn back to Mike then.
Well, I was going to do a kind of a summary, and I think John did that pretty well there in his closing remarks. I did earlier on say we wanted to make sure we addressed any concerns or questions. As you went along, that's fine, but then as you stand back and think about this, what concerns or major questions you might have, along with, I think probably you may want to hear from Ted too, and input. We've met with him several times, once initially to try to understand where we're at. Last week on Wednesday to go through our preliminary findings and presentation to make sure that what we thought we heard and what we were proposing kind of was hitting the mark. And you're going to end up owning whatever approach you go with, whether it's with Seth's or with ours. You're going to ultimately end up owning this plant. Ted's going to operate it. I think he's got a pretty good idea of what we're proposing, but you may want to hear some comments and input from him on this also, on just our approach versus that of Woodseth. Ours is certainly to deal with the plant deficiencies in kind of a smart way, so we give you the best bang for the buck looking long term. And we think that's what this here pulls together and provides for you. Ultimately here, I suppose you're going to have to make a decision, you know, which approach makes sense for you. Basically retain a consultant to deliver that, define the scope, get that consultant. I guess what we're thinking is that could be 2016 to 2017 design with 2017 to 2018 construction. That's possible to do, assuming you move realistically or expediently along with this. So with that, I guess we would be open for questions and certainly any input that Ted would feel comfortable giving.
Mike, before you sit down, one of the last slides you went on was project implementation. And I don't have our current or 2016 budget in front of me or what we've already approved for 2017. We did some repairs and upgrades this year. I don't know if any of that is in this, or we had some planned, I'm sorry, for 2017. And then I guess the real question, we were talking, you know, roughly $1 million versus what we have now in the budget for doing things. Kind of like to hear, and that might not be a question for you, that might be a question for the other Mike. But,
Do you want to see it? I went through and compared your analysis to what Ted said. Should I come up there? Well, you know, and I think you're pretty well on the mark. There was a couple items that I think you found to be short-term fixes or Band-Aids, you know. And this flow equalization was something that the commission had talked about in August. So this thing is, how do you get this thing up on the screen?
and Dave, don't forget to use the mic so people can hear you.
And don't forget to introduce yourself, so we've
I think we,
got it recorded right.
his name's over there.
So I'm the poor guy that sits on the Public Works Commission and sees all this stuff. Anyways, I made some comments on here, the little marks here. I walked through all these items, and thanks for going through the WSN proposal, because that's what I wanted to see to make sense. The one with the first mark here, something you thought was probably unnecessary, and I thought maybe that came from, why upgrade that panel if you're going to put a SCADA system in? You know, you're going to be doing it twice. The next one, there was some comments on. The big one here, you told us to stay away from, the denitrification, and that's what Ted has told us. And if you look at the bottom, Mark, to what you were talking about, if you take the 939 and subtract the 250, you know, as a group, we kind of talked about almost $700,000 in upgrades. The things that are missing, though, are on the bottom of this page, and one of them is the flow equalization. And I'm kind of thinking if you fix that, then with the variable speed input pumps that he's working on now, that you could treat some of this stuff at night, slow things down during the day. So at least in my novice world, you could do that thing, and then the rest of the stuff perhaps you could fit in the years to come, you know, if you can handle all that. And the piping size things were not addressed by WSN. And we did have some money in there, well, no money for the well, but on the generator, if you look up here, they did talk about $60,000. So I'm comfortable with what they're saying, that this all makes sense. There's just, the flow equalization seems to be something that, you know, if we went ahead with that, we could probably get by. The problem with that is I don't know how much it is. So,
Well, the other one that surprises me, and Ted has been on this issue for a long time, is the piping deficiency at the, as the outflow of, which tank is that? Which process?
It's pumped into the first building, which is called pre-treatment.
But the 4-inch line,
Yeah, the lines that come out of that building, there's a 6-inch line that comes, it's the force main from the lift station into
Yep.
the building.
yep,
There's 2 other 4-inch lines that are pressure flow lines into that building.
right,
There is a 6-inch line that goes to the next process. That's the bottleneck.
yes. And you have made us aware of that for quite a period of time.
Since this conception of this plan, it was one of the questions I even wrote on a red line on a set of blueprints and asked during the design.
Yeah.
It's been that long I've been asking that question.
There's nobody that has a better command of this plant than Ted, and I appreciate that. How come WSN did not include that in their study? Because it's a notorious problem for you.
I guess to his figures and numbers, it isn't a problem.
Anytime a tank flows on the floor and over the top, there's something wrong. And you've stated that multiple times.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Did I catch a comment in here that we are actually downsizing some pumps right now?
Right now that we have, there's 2 pumps that are being installed in the main treatment plant. And that was part of this year's, the 2016 plan, was to do these 2 station pumps and put a mixer in. We are going from an enclosed impeller, and what happens is the rags and everything tie up and bind up and plug that pump. So we're going to a different style of impeller. It's an open impeller, and rags don't stick in it as easily. The other thing we're adding is we're adding a mixer into the lift station. Sand and grit have a tendency to settle out in the station, especially at nighttime. We get those long flows. But when it settles out, it's sitting there and globs up, and that's what's plugging the pump. So this other mixer will take and cut all that stuff, chop it all up. So what'll happen is it's called for a lift station to kick on. Mixer will come on, we'll mix it for so long, mixer will shut off, and then we'll pump it into the treatment plant.
Now, were these pumps of proper size to meet the potential max capacity of our plant should we ever need it? Or did we just put these in to handle our bottleneck for right now because we don't want to overflow tanks?
No, all the processes are designed around that 350 gallons a minute, as far as the weir overflow and all, and that's what these are sized to.
So that's under the plant's capacity size.
Right now, the current stations are pumping, when they both kick on wide open, the 2 of them are giving us 500 gallons a minute.
Ted, which is the one we're replacing with a variable speed drive?
That's the one we were just talking about. That's
Okay,
an
and
influent
what
pump.
does it pump today?
Right now, currently, it pumps 500 gallons a minute.
So we have,
total.
what the issue is they have, in peak times, when you're getting a lot coming into the plant, when the pump comes on, it's not like an accelerator on your car, can go slow and fast, it just comes on, and 500 gallons a minute goes into the plant, and if it comes on multiple times,
Or stays on.
then everything in the plant starts to do this. So what Ted and WSN talked about, well, perhaps, and this isn't the best thing, they could slow things down if they had a variable speed operation or drive on it.
But you're
So
talking about.
they don't have to take so much at one time into the plant. They can jack it up, but
But you're talking about putting variable speed pumps in. However, they still don't have that max capacity.
that's right.
Well, they'll
Okay.
still give us the 150,000 gallons a day but it's,
Yeah, but it doesn't handle that peak that happens in the morning.
well, we should be, with this 350 gallons, it should be okay.
Should be.
That's what all the engineers are telling me from the,
No, I understand what you're saying. And of course, they're always replaceable.
we still have the old pumps. If we have to, at a future date, we could reinstall them.
How long, if you put these pumps in, how long will they be good for in terms of flow growth?
Flow growth?
Yeah,
Well, at 35%, it'd be a long ways out. I mean, like I said, I don't anticipate any major development, I guess, in town. I mean, we could go for 15, 20, 25 years.
yeah, but we've already seen something, and we haven't put our finger on what that increased flow during the summer was this year.
It's our tourist season. That's what it is. I think
understand,
it's
but that's the
those,
first time we've had that.
we've had little ones. We've never had anything like this where they stick around like this. The nice weather, the price of fuel, the economy, I think everybody just stuck around this year.
Well, it was
Had a good time.
It was 3 times the normal flow, if I remember right. And guess who else had an increased demand?
Our phone company.
Yes, and they were at 5.
Yeah.
I'm just saying to you, yes, the technology is out there, but, it's not causing me to pee more. And I probably shouldn't say that here, but there's something, I haven't got my arm around it, but there's something happening. More people are spending more time here, that's for sure.
I'm positive that's what it is.
So Ted, and Mike, what's the recommendation? I mean, you talked about flow equalization, pipe sizing, are those the highest priority items that would buy us time?
I think you need to look at it as all, like he said before, that by doing this over a couple of years, because you got to integrate these pieces that are going to talk in the SCADA system. I mean, even the flow equalization is, the flow is going to, it gets to a certain point, rather than going through the plant, it's going to go to equalization. There has to be the computer controlling that, and you're not going to stick this in here and then try to automate this other part at another time, and that at another time, and then, you're going to try to all do it so everything talks at the same time to itself, because all of it is key. I mean, from the water that's being, from the backwash coming back to the head of the plant, to the water coming in, that's all got to be timed and sequenced, and all of that's got to talk. It's all key to this operation of this plant. We've been doing it manually, we keep it manual, I mean, you guys could stay manual like it is now. We could, our flows would, our effluent standards would probably stay the same. But at some day, I'm going to have to call the duty officer, and I'm going to say, I had a problem. And then I'm going to have to report to you guys after I reported to them, and we've had a violation.
You've done that already.
So there were some items here that basically were engineered incorrectly from the
Right.
beginning.
That's right.
I mean, we have a plant that, we built a plant that can potentially do X, but then we put a bunch of stuff inside it that's only going to let us get to N.
Yep, there's bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Put chokes in.
So we had, so I mean, I just look at the, I mean, if you're going to start doing repairs and doing upgrades, then you need to do it correct from the bottom up, and you don't do it
Absolutely.
piecemeal, yeah. Just getting a little bit ahead of the immediate decision needs for the plant, but do we have adjacent land around there for this well issue?
Yes,
This
we
is-
have we have two residents that have actually approached me. One of them I mentioned as part of the recycling area for the leaves and the brush and all that stuff, that he would like to sell to us. That's an additional piece. And one of the other neighbors came to me here last week and said, for X, you guys can have all three pieces of property plus the house and all the buildings. And I thought it was a really good price, and I haven't had a chance to even talk to or see you guys yet, so.
But in this whole process, we also acquired that whole width of property that goes to the river from the plant, did we not? We own that too.
Yeah,
now.
both of these are on both sides of that.
Yeah, right, but
Is
we
what these
own the
two are.
piece all the way to the river.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the other two on the other side
Okay.
is the ones that they've been offered to us.
If I'm not mistaken, Mark could tune us into that one.
Well, that happened right before I came here, but that was the Thal property. Is that a potential location for the well?
It's that's engineering telling me that. I think it is, but the engineers would have to tell me.
All right. It was a separate parcel with an odd lot line. but-
Yeah, nothing
Yeah,
is
all
the same down there. It jumps
Yep.
around.
But the building's gone, I mean, the home is gone. There was a well there, I don't know what happened to that.
There's still a little 4-inch domestic well there.
There is there, okay.
This is frustrating to me. And the reason it's frustrating to me are the three items that Mr. Schrupp highlighted at the bottom of his that were not included in the other study. And one of them, to me, is hypercritical, which I call the main choke in the plant, which is that 4 or 6 inch line.
And that, once again, was not going to, excuse me, I didn't mean to jump in, that was not going to, because I think we're on the same page here, that was not going to be addressed with the WSN. So here we were looking at another proposal that still didn't address the problem that was engineered incorrectly from the very beginning.
That's right.
Once again, I
It's
apologize, I
said
didn't mean to
very,
interrupt you. My
very,
thought came out.
we shouldn't talk like that, Brad.
Ted,
But
Mr.
that's-
Schrupp, you guys sit in the same room and talk about this once a month. What do you guys, I'd really like to hear from you two, which you recommend.
Let's see, you've got-
If there were only 6 things to fix, it would be an easy job, but everybody's absolutely right. These are all intertwined. Ted's already talked about all the piping he has to run between all these devices, and they're going to have items for the computer I/O out there so that they know whether they're open or closed, or they turn them on and off. And I mean, you just can't have an electrician come out 1 month and do one thing and come and do another one. It's probably got to be handled in a big project, so if you're laying pipe in the ground, you lay it big enough to handle all the stuff on the east end of the plant and on the west and the whole thing.
In an
What are
earlier
you-
part
what
of
are
my,
you saying?
You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of things here, but there's priorities that have to be done, and I think you need to, somebody needs to go through and make a schedule on what do we work on first, because we don't know what that is, and how much are these things going to cost?
Well, I think he's, you know, it's tough, but I think that Bolton and Mink has done an excellent job. They've hit some things that, as an old civil engineer, bugged me for a long time, and they're in here, and I haven't seen them willing to address some of their own mistakes in the past. I think that's been one of our problems. I'm very disappointed in that. I don't know where we are on that, but what I see them doing here, I don't see that we can do it on a patchwork basis.
Mr. Mayor, may I just say something?
Yes, sir.
Early part of my career, when I first got out of college, I worked for a community down toward the cities. And we were doing $500 to $1 million of fixes every year because of the growth we were achieving. And we'd have X contractor do it this year, and that controller supplier doing it this year. Next year, we had this contractor and this controller supplier doing it. We ran into an absolute nightmare because nothing would talk to each other, nothing would work. So we were going back and redoing other things to make everything work and talk together. I would really hope we don't do it piecemeal because I think you're just asking for problems. It'll cost the city more money in the long run. That's my opinion.
Mark,
Well,
you
just
started
again,
this. You better talk to it
the
now.
budget for this year, was it, we had planned to do some upgrades to it in 2017, correct?
We had been talking about it, but we had not allocated any money other than I would like Mike to come up and just give you a heads up if we could in the next couple minutes.
If we kick this project off, how much debt service is due in 2017? That's the real question. I mean, if we put this off for another year because we think we can't afford the debt, but then the debt is put off to another year, I'm not sure that it would cost us anything in 2017, except the origination fees.
I think you're right.
Huh?
I think you're right. I don't think there'd be any debt service in 2017.
There we go.
I think you'd have debt service in 2018 and beyond. I think, it seems to me, and maybe Ted can give his opinion on which fix he thinks would take us into the long term, and then, depending upon who that is, it seems to me you got to get an engineering proposal to take the next step. I think that's going to answer a lot of the questions that Mr. Schrupp had brought up as far as what to do and the timing and the phasing. I think you do it all in one project. You have an engineering proposal to accomplish that or get us to the next step, regardless if it's WSN or Bolton and Mink or who you're more comfortable with. And then also at the same time as you get the proposal back, hopefully, probably in the next month by the December meeting, at the same time you have Mike get together with David Drown people and come up with a financing plan, at least some ideas on how to finance this thing over the long term. So, I mean, it seems to me you get the engineering proposal, you get the way to pay for it once you do it.
And that's kind of what David Drun had done before. If I remember right, we'd looked at a bond that was coming off or something.
Yeah, right.
And using that 140,000 basically to,
Yeah, and whether or not that's still available, I guess
Yeah,
that's
I
what
don't know.
Mike and David have to put together, but you need to get your engineering proposal to get the specifics of what needs to be done and kind of some more idea as far as what it's going to cost to do it.
Question I had too, when we're talking funding, is this, on that slide on page 9, at long-range planning and funding, says providing service to unsewered areas may make eligible for low-interest financing. I'm guessing that's talking about expanding the footprint of our pipe in the ground, and I don't know, that would be part of the study if we had Bolton Mink do that?
remember I talked to you a while back about maybe
Right.
what is the future of the whole community?
Yep,
I think that's a second part, totally separate,
Okay.
how we take care of the sewer for our whole community.
but the
Is the
whole,
big pipe is the idea, or do we go,
well,
where we manage everybody's? you
yeah,
know?
the separate account, I agree that, but not to do the whole community and with the sewer plant,
No,
but we
that's-
are, but the changes that they were, was it John up there was talking about some of the stuff to increase our capacity on a daily rate, and able to smooth those flows out, so it's working at night more than less during the day, all that sort of thing would allow us to expand it somewhat.
Yes.
I'm not suggesting all the way around the lake or
No.
anything like that, no.
I think we have to be careful with that, Mark. I think we're talking about bringing the plant up to design capacity, not necessarily,
Well,
Well, it's the-
if I
it's-
recall, was it John? Maybe he could address that again? I thought I heard him say that anyway.
okay.
Correct. If the city was looking to apply for the state financing, if you were to incorporate some unsewered areas, that would typically increase the scoring significantly. Right now, the scope that we're looking at as far as cost is just the wastewater plant itself.
Right.
Anything in the collection system, unsewered areas would be, could be incorporated with that, but would be kind of a second phase to what we're talking about tonight.
You're talking about it.
That's kind of more of the,
This was more of a funding, I
Yep.
was looking at funding as in, they're gonna be buying
we're
it.
looking just this
They're gonna be paying
project.
for water down there.
If we're looking just this project, how the state's ranking worksheet works out, it's going to rank fairly low, and it's unlikely the city would be eligible for the low-interest money with the wastewater scope itself. If you want to look at doing the unsewered areas, which would improve the rank, that also is going to push the schedule out
All right.
another year or 2 years
All right.
past, which
Yeah,
may
but
not
the-
be worth the, current bonding rates are low, and I'm not a financial advisor, but bonding rates are quite low right now, and it may not be worth chasing the low-interest loan for.
So the next step was,
Digging into the cost and the schedule, I would say. Prioritizing and getting some more accurate costs. Something you guys can do.
come on up here and sell us, Mike.
Where are you guys? on this?
There's,
Pick the
there'll be
fix
no,
and
no question that
you're
number
saying
one,
if
we
you're-
can't delay.
If you're interested in our approach, then the next step would be to ask us to go back and refine the scope and say, basically, this is what we understand you want and a better handle on the costs.
We do that.
Sounds right. What do you guys say?
I see a lot of head bobbing.
Sounds right.
Sounds good.
Do,
The bobbleheads.
so the
Motion?
motion is to what?
Refine the scope and.
Approve
do
Bolton
some,
Mink to define the
Zero
scope.
in on the costs of the fix.
So who gets there? You just went to a big, long class on sewers, you should be our guy. Or the guy that sits in that meeting.
He did such a good job of self-homeschooling, and I had to go sit through an EPA meeting.
You guys, you got 7 minutes to resolve this. Come on.
I would make a motion to have Bolton Mink further research and define the scope and cost of their proposed project.
I'd second that.
Motion Nelson, second Hecox, to further research, refine, and define the costs and the elements of their proposal. Is that what we said?
Would you, if I can, Mr. Mayor, would that be available, Mike, at the next meeting? December?
Be kind
My
of hard.
workhorse says
Yeah,
yes.
What did you just ask?
Okay?
The December meeting.
Is there a
And
cost
can have
for
that
that?
ready for the December meeting?
Yes.
Put that in the motion? Okay.
Well, is there a cost for that, for doing that? Because we need to include that if it is. No, you're just, no. That's what I'm used to.
Oh, good question.
They're looking for a proposal. I would assume there's no cost to prepare a proposal. If they go ahead with it, there's going to be a cost, obviously, but
Oh, yeah.
At no cost to Cross Lake. Is that what's in the motion?
Oh, we didn't authorize any funding in the motion, so.
What do you think, sir?
Head bobbing.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm hearing yes from the audience.
Well, we need a second for the motion.
Oh, you got, Gary did.
Gary did.
We didn't have to
Gary did
modify it.
already.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
then, based on this discussion, we'll have Mike go ahead and, Mike Linus, our finance director, will try to figure out alternatives for paying for what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And we wouldn't be talking, again, bonding would probably occur in late 17, you probably wouldn't look at payments on this thing, and depending upon phasing, till 18 or even 19. So we've got some time, and hopefully some bond issues are coming off, and we
Well-
can just use that to offset this cost.
With the instability of the money market right now, we probably shouldn't waste a lot of time.
No, and again, it's, if you're talking, let's say you're talking $1 million project, a 10-year deal, it's $100,000 a year. I mean, those aren't big, roughly. You're not talking about huge numbers, and something we could build into our budget pretty easily, I think.
It's a big number to me.
Yeah. What is, in layperson's terms, but when we're talking about the city budget, I think it is something we can fit in.
Yep, okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Do we need anything else on that subject?
At this point, we would need to break until 7 o'clock and start the regular meeting at 7 o'clock.
Well, we're just going to, the meeting has been open, so we'd just recess for a second, for 5 minutes?
Just adjourn this one and
I'll make a motion to adjourn the special meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.